This is Lecture 19 on Digestive System, or Digestive System 1. We'll now begin our journey through the digestive system, which consists of the alimentary canal from the mouth to the anus, 3 accessory organs, the liver, pancreas, gallbladder, and a number of other accessory structures like salivary glands, teeth, etc. Now, the digestive tract itself is the alimentary canal that extends from the oral cavity, goes down the pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, and then out through the rectum and anus. Some of the accessory organs of the digestive tract include the teeth, tongue, salivary glands, pancreas, liver, and gallbladder. Here we can see a diagram of the digestive tract as it extends from the oral cavity down the tube known as the esophagus and into the rest of the digestive tract. Now, the functions of the digestive system in detail are first and foremost ingestion. It brings food and liquid into the mouth. It then is following this with mechanical processing, where it actually chews and swallows food. This can also include some of the overall churning of the stomach, as well as segmentation in the digestive tract where your alimentary canal is mechanically breaking food down. Digestion is the chemical breakdown of food into nutrient form where it can then be absorbed. Secretion is the secretion of products from the linings of the digestive tract and accessory organs in order to facilitate digestion. From there, because of digestion, we are able to go through absorption. This is the movement of nutrients from the small intestine into the bloodstream. Then we can go through excretion, where we eliminate different waste products into the lumen of the digestive tract, and begin compaction, which occurs in the colon or large intestine. This is going to be the progressive dehydration of organic wastes that will then lead to the final function, defecation, which is the elimination of wastes from the digestive tract through the anus. When looking at the digestive tract, we'll start histological and actually look at the 4 major layers of the digestive tract that are continuous throughout the digestive tract, going all the way from the esophagus down through to the large intestine. The 4 major layers are mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa, and the serosa. Here we can see a diagram of some of the small intestine and the inner linings. Take note of the actual surface that is exposed to the outside environment or lumen space. This is the mucosa. The mucosa is going to be the most superficial layer, because remember, the lumen is actually going to be exposed to the outside of the body because the digestive alimentary canal space that runs through is continuous with the outside of the body. I've said it before, remember, we are a human donut. The mucosa itself is going to be the inner lining of the wall of the digestive tract, and it's a mucous membrane called the mucosa. It consists of a thin epithelium containing mucosal cells, and the mucosal epithelium can be simple or stratified in ranges from squamous to columnar, depending upon where you are along the tract. It also has a lamina propria, which actually contains blood vessels and lymph vessels. Some mucosa actually has a narrow band of smooth muscle called the muscularis mucosa that we'll see a little bit later. Here we can actually see the definitive layers of the digestive tract, including the smooth band of muscularis mucosa in the mucosal layer. Following the mucosal layer, we go out to the submucosa, which is areolar connective tissue containing large blood and lymph vessels that may contain glands that secrete different buffers or enzymes into the lumen. It also has a series of nerve fibers here that is known as the submucosal plexus and is one portion of the enteric nervous system that we'll talk about it a little bit later. It contains sensory and autonomic neurons that are critical to digestive function. From here, we move to the muscularis externa. These are the 2 thick bands of muscle that you can see that are going to have a longitudinal layer and a circular inner layer. It also contains the myenteric plexus, a band of nerves that are also going to be part of the enteric nervous system. The final layer is going to actually be a layer of connective tissue, and this is going to be continuous with the peritoneal serous cavity and therefore part of the visceral serosal membrane. This is the serosa. It is an outer band of connective tissue that adheres the digestive tract to the rest of the body. As discussed, the mucosa is the inner lining of the digestive tract, and its mucosa of the small intestine makes up the folds called plicae. Plicae in the small intestine are going to increase the surface area to have an increased rate of absorption. The submucosa, as discussed, is going to contain the submucosal nerve plexus as well as blood vessels and lymphatics. The muscularis externa consists of two bands of muscle, a circular inner layer and a longitudinal outer layer. This is going to be involved in the moving of food down the digestive tract as well as some of its mechanical breakdown in the forms of peristalsis and segmentation. It also contains the myenteric plexus. The myenteric plexus is going to be a network of parasympathetic ganglia and sympathetic postganglionic fibers that are also involved in the enteric nervous system. Finally, we have the serosa. This covers the muscularis externa and is the outermost layer of the digestive system, but is going to be the deepest when talking about it in anatomical terms. The movement of digestive materials throughout the alimentary canal requires the coordination of multiple layers and segments of smooth muscle, which is the function of the enteric nervous system, or the ENS, as seen here. The enteric nervous system is a combination of nerve fibers and nerve cell bodies, along with the extensions of the autonomic nervous system. It comes in two expansive plexuses. The first is the submucosal, or Meissner's plexus, that will be throughout the actual submucosal layer. The second is the myenteric, or Auerbach's plexus. This is going to be throughout the muscularis mucosa. These combined will actually initiate many of the movements of peristalsis and segmentation. The enteric nervous system integrates sensory information, like stretch, with input from the central nervous system, but it can also operate independently, which is a truly fascinating portion of this. This means that the enteric nervous system is actually going to be looked at in many ways as a second brain that can function entirely independently of the central nervous system, which is a very impressive feat. Moving on from the enteric nervous system, we're going to talk a little bit about some of that motility that comes from it. So between meals, we have what is called the migrating motor complex that is initiated by the enteric nervous system. After meals, we have what is called peristalsis and segmentation that takes place. During this, the muscularis externa will propel material through the digestive tract. This propelling of material through the digestive tract is peristalsis. Think about it like squeezing toothpaste through a tube. The material that is churned and fragmented at the same time is propelled through the digestive tract. This is called segmentation. Think about it like a slower moving protein shaker. The migrating motor complex gradually works its way throughout the digestive tract. It's going to be a series of contractions that begins at an empty stomach and ends in the large intestine. This is how peristalsis works. You have a bolus of food that's actually going to initiate a stretch in the digestive tract. That stretch will cause the muscularis mucosa to actually be able to contract around it. That contraction is going to pinch that bolus of food and gradually push its way through. So it's going to gradually slide its way through by kind of pinching off portion by portion. Segmentation works when multiple pieces of the bolus are going to be in the digestive tract, and it periodically will keep pinching at different portions in order to break up the bolus of food into different segments. That's why this is called segmentation. Now that we've left with some of the basics, we can actually move into the oral cavity. The oral cavity is going to be the first area where food would enter into the body, and it consists of a number of structures, including the tongue, uvula, salivary glands, and teeth. Here we can see the oral cavity with the different teeth, tongue, etc. On a side view, we can see it even better, where we actually pass through into the back, down into the actual pharynx. Now, first we're going to discuss some of the accessory structures that we haven't covered in this class, namely the salivary glands. There are three pairs of salivary glands: the parotid salivary gland, the sublingual salivary gland, and the submandibular salivary gland. Now, it is important to note that all three glands produce salivary amylase, which partially digests carbohydrate. The main difference between them The main difference between the salivary glands is going to be in their size, location, and the other stuff that they secrete besides salivary amylase. The largest of the salivary glands is the parotid salivary gland. This is located between the ear and the masseter muscle, just inferior to the zygomatic arch. Saliva here is dominated by the enzyme of salivary amylase, which breaks down complex carbohydrates into simple sugars. So the major difference here is going to be that the saliva that is produced at this largest of the glands is going to be more salivary amylase than the others. Next is the sublingual salivary gland, located below the tongue. It secretes a mostly mucus-containing saliva, and it only makes up about 5% of total salivary volume. So this is going to be the mucus one. Finally, we have the submandibular. Now, this is located on the floor of the mouth along the medial border of the mandible, and it secretes a mixture of mucus and salivary amylase with a little bit more water in it. And this produces about 70% of the total saliva. The tongue has multiple functions, including the manipulation of food, sensory analysis, secretion of enzymes to aid in fat digestion, and the movement for the formulation of words. The tongue is a free-moving muscle that is actually attached directly to the hyoid. Here we can actually see the tongue as it extends back down past the tonsils. It consists, of course, of the different papillae that would have different taste buds or allow for the manipulation of food. We've already covered this back when we talked about gustation. In some cases, we can actually have a thin, delicate piece of skin that is connected to the floor in the roof of the mouth called the lingual frenulum. In some cases, the lingual frenulum is too short because the tongue fuses directly to the floor. This is called ankyloglossia, and in some cases you need a frenotomy in order to separate this. This reduces the mobility of the tip of the tongue, affecting speech and chewing, and you can simply clip it during surgery to fix it. Next, we'll move on to the teeth. Together with the tongue, cheeks, and palate, the teeth function to masticate or mechanically digest food in the oral cavity. Looking at the adult tooth, we have a few major structures to consider. Notice we have the crown, which is the exposed portion of tooth, the neck, which actually meets the gums directly, and then the root, which extends down into the bone. Enamel is going to cover the crown of the tooth, and it is densely packed calcium phosphate, which is the hardest biological substance that we know of. It differs from bone by being completely acellular and avascular, so it has no overall blood flow and it has no proteins, so it doesn't have collagen. Therefore, it does not heal. Dentin is going to be just below. Now, this is less dense than enamel, but still acellular. Most of the bulk of the tooth is going to be made up of dentin, with enamel surrounding it. Dentin is a living tissue receiving nutrients from the pulp cavity below. The pulp cavity is a spongy, highly vascular cavity in the crown or neck that nourishes the dentin. Here we have blood vessels, including the dental artery and dental vein, and nerves that project through the apical foramen and through root canals and exit into the pulp cavity. The root in itself is actually going to be the anchor that sits directly into the bony socket or alveolus and is connected via periodontal ligaments extending from the dentin of the root to the bone. The root dentin is going to be covered by a dense enamel-like cementum, which also will anchor the periodontal ligaments. Now, there are a few different types of teeth. We have incisors, cuspids, bicuspids, and molars. The incisors are going to be blade-shaped and cutting or clipping. The cuspids are cone-shaped for tearing. The bicuspids are smaller flattened crowns for crushing or grinding, and of course the molars are large flattened crowns for crushing and grinding. Here we can actually see the overall development of the teeth throughout the years and how long it takes to actually finish developing them. Our third molar we most commonly know of as wisdom teeth. The third molar is typically removed because a lot of people don't have enough space in their mouth for them. Now, when looking at swallowing or deglutition, it is a reflex action that moves a bolus of food into and through the esophagus. Swallowing consists of both a voluntary and an involuntary phase. First, there's the buccal phase. This is where the tongue pushes the food through the oropharynx area. Following this, we enter into the pharyngeal phase. You can remember this because the pharynx is the throat. This is where the bolus will actually enter into the throat, and the epiglottis is going to close over the glottis as the hyoid bone moves back. The esophageal phase is where the upper esophageal sphincter opens and the bolus begins moving down the esophagus. Here we can see a nice diagram of the overall phases of swallowing, where we have step 1, the buccal phase, where we initiate swallowing to move the bolus to the back of the throat. Following this, the epiglottis will close over the glottis to ensure that food does not go down the windpipe. From here, we can actually extend down from the upper esophageal sphincter as it opens, pushing its way down the esophagus, and then down, opening the lower esophageal sphincter and entering into the stomach. This has been Digestive System, Part 1.